The snow began falling around 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve, the kind of soft, persistent snow that transformed the streets of downtown Chicago into something almost sacred. By the time the black SUV pulled to the curb outside Fontana's Italian restaurant, the sidewalks had disappeared beneath a layer of white that muffled the city's usual roar into something gentler, something that sounded almost like forgiveness. The driver stepped out first, circling to the rear passenger door with practiced efficiency, but the man who emerged did not look like someone accustomed to being chauffeured. Nathan Hale stood 6'1" in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but the knot of his tie had been loosened an inch and his dark hair needed a trim, badly enough that the snow caught in it like tiny accusations of neglect. He carried exhaustion the way some men carry briefcases always everywhere, as though setting it down might mean admitting it existed. Two small hands gripped his one on each side, and the girls who belonged to those hands tumbled out of the vehicle with the barely contained energy of children who had been promised something wonderful and intended to collect immediately. Rosie hit the sidewalk first, her red velvet dress already collecting snowflakes along the shoulders, her dark curls escaping from beneath a knit cap that she had clearly been fighting since they left home. Her twin sister Chloe followed with more deliberation, stepping carefully onto the snow-dusted concrete, pulling off her own purple cap and releasing an identical cascade of dark curls. They were mirror images in almost every way that mattered. Same honey-colored eyes, same small, fierce mouths, same red velvet, chosen with the kind of seriousness that 7-year-olds reserve for occasions they understood were important, even if they could not articulate why. But Rosie's cap was already shoved in her pocket, forgotten, while Chloe folded hers neatly and tucked it into her coat. That difference told you everything. Nathan guided them toward the heavy wooden door of Fontana's with both hands on their shoulders, a gesture that looked protective to anyone watching, but was actually navigational. Rosie had a tendency to veer toward anything that sparkled, and the Christmas lights along the restaurant's facade were putting in serious work tonight. The warm air hit them the moment the door swung open, a wall of garlic and fresh bread, and the low murmur of holiday conversations happening at tables where people who loved each other were pretending the world outside didn't exist for a few hours. Nathan's chest did what it always did when he stepped into this restaurant. It tightened, then released, then tightened again, like a muscle that couldn't decide whether this place was medicine or poison. "Daddy, it smells like heaven," Rosie announced, her voice cutting through the ambient noise with the confidence of a child who had never once considered whispering. Chloe tilted her head, genuinely puzzled. "Heaven smells like garlic bread. Heaven probably smells like whatever makes you happiest." Nathan heard himself say it and recognized the ache behind the words, the way they echoed something Claire used to believe, that happiness was specific, personal, non-negotiable. Claire's heaven would have smelled like sunflowers and the inside of a new textbook and the hospital nursery where she had planned to spend her career holding other people's babies until she could hold her own. The hostess, a young woman named Maria who had seated them every Christmas Eve for the past 3 years, greeted them with the warmth of someone who remembered them and was glad they had come back. She led them through the restaurant, past tables of couples and families and clusters of friends, toward the corner booth with red leather seats and a small candle flickering in a glass holder. Nathan followed, but his eyes were doing what they always did in any space, counting exits, noting the proximity of other diners, locating restrooms. The habits of a man who had once spent 16-hour days on construction sites where knowing your surroundings could mean the difference between going home and going to the hospital. Those instincts had never left him, even after he had traded hard hats for boardrooms, even after the title on his business card had changed from site engineer to chief executive officer. Somewhere between pouring foundations and signing acquisition papers worth $500 million, Nathan Hale had built an empire. He just hadn't managed to build himself a life inside it. He was scanning for hazards when he saw her. Near the far window, in a pool of soft lamplight that turned the falling snow outside into something cinematic, a woman sat alone. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency rather than style, wearing a sweater that was clean and well-maintained, but clearly not new. No jewelry, no makeup. Her hands, and Nathan noticed hands the way engineers notice load-bearing walls, automatically professionally, were not office hands. They had the particular roughness of someone who worked with them constantly, who washed them 50 times a day under institutional soap. She held a wine glass in slender fingers barely touched and stared out at the falling snow with an expression that Nathan recognized the way you recognize your own reflection in an unexpected mirror. It was the look of someone trying very hard not to cry in public. He had perfected that look himself. He knew its architecture intimately, the rigid shoulders, the careful breathing, the jaw locked tight enough to ache, the eyes fixed on some middle distance where emotion couldn't quite reach you. "Daddy, you're squishing my hand." Chloe's whisper pulled him back. He realized he had stopped walking entirely, still staring at the stranger by the window. "Sorry, sweetheart." He forced his attention to his daughters as they reached the booth. The girls scrambled onto one side, immediately beginning their usual ritual, Rosie rearranging the salt and pepper shakers into what she called a family. Chloe carefully sorting the crayons from the children's activity pack Maria had provided, organizing them by color, with the precision of someone who believed chaos was a personal failing. Nathan slid into the opposite seat, positioning himself so he could see both his daughters and, if he was being honest, the woman by the window. He picked up the menu, though he already knew what he would order. The same thing he had ordered every Christmas Eve for 7 years. Chicken parmesan, Claire's favorite. She had loved this restaurant, had insisted they come here on their first wedding anniversary, despite Nathan's protests that they couldn't afford it on a site engineer's salary and a student teacher's stipend. She had ordered the chicken parmesan and closed her eyes with the first bite, making a sound of pure contentment that had made him fall in love with her all over again, right there between the breadstick basket and the house Chianti. "I'm going to marry this chicken," she had declared, and Nathan had laughed so hard the couple at the next table shot them dirty looks. 6 years after she died, he still ordered it. A private memorial, a culinary seance that no one understood, and he could not stop performing. Their waiter approached Sal, an older gentleman who had been at Fontana's for at least 2 decades, whose gentle smile suggested he remembered them and understood more than he let on. "Good evening, Hale family. The usual to start, bruschetta for the table, chocolate milk for the young ladies," Nathan confirmed, but before Sal could retreat, a sound from across the restaurant cut through the ambient noise. Not loud, a sharp click of glass on wood, the kind of sound a phone makes when someone puts it down harder than they intend. Nathan looked over and saw the woman by the window pressing the back of her hand against her eyes, her shoulders rigid with the effort of holding herself together. She had been checking her phone. Whatever she found there had broken something. He knew that gesture too. The pressing of knuckles against closed eyes, as if you could physically push the tears back inside. "She's sad," Rosie observed, not looking up from the reindeer she was coloring, with fierce determination, switching from brown to red with the focus of a surgeon selecting instruments. "The lady by the window. She's sad like you get sometimes when you think we're asleep." The observation landed in Nathan's sternum like a gentle fist. He exchanged a glance with Chloe, who had stopped coloring entirely and was studying the woman with the unblinking intensity that twins seemed to share, that particular frequency of attention that made adults uncomfortable because it saw too much. "We shouldn't stare at people, girls, and we definitely shouldn't make assumptions about how they're feeling." Chloe's voice carried the quiet conviction of a courtroom witness. "She keeps checking out her phone and then putting it face down like it hurt her. And she's been sitting alone since before we got here." Nobody came. Nathan looked again, unable to stop himself. Vivian would glance at her phone, her expression flickering with something raw: disappointment, anger, the particular humiliation of hoping and being proven foolish for it, then set the device face down on the white tablecloth as if the screen had personally betrayed her. He had seen that specific pattern of behavior before. In himself, on the faces of well-meaning friends who had tried to arrange dates he canceled at the last minute, on the faces of women who had waited for men who never showed. This was the unmistakable choreography of someone who had been stood up on Christmas Eve. "Order whatever you want tonight," Nathan told his daughters, on pushing the stranger from his mind. "It's Christmas Eve. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Rosie, practical as always. The real answers crowded his throat. "Celebrating that we survived another year. Celebrating that your mother gave her life to bring you into this world, and I'm still trying every single day to be worthy of that sacrifice. Celebrating that 7 years of single parenthood haven't broken me yet, though some nights it comes close. Some nights the silence in the penthouse after you fall asleep is so loud it sounds like an accusation. Celebrating us, that we're together, that we're healthy, that we have each other. The girls seemed satisfied returning to crayons and excited speculation about Santa's itinerary. Nathan picked up his menu, already knowing his order, already bracing for the moment when he would close his eyes at the first bite and feel Claire's absence like a phantom limb. Then Rosie moved. She slid out of the booth with the fluid determination of a child who has made a decision and sees no reason to consult adults about it. Nathan recognized the set of her jaw, the same expression she got right before she did something that would either melt your heart or make you want to disappear into the floor. Rosie, sit down. I'll be right back. Already moving, weaving between tables with the confidence of someone who had never been taught to fear rejection, who had not yet learned that approaching strangers was dangerous, that caring openly was a vulnerability most adults had spent decades learning to armor against. Rosie Catherine Hale. But she was gone. Nathan started to rise, every protective instinct firing, ready to intercept his daughter, before she bothered a woman who clearly wanted to be left alone with her pain. But Chloe's small hand closed around his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly firm for a 7-year-old, and when he looked down at her, those eyes held something older than her years, something that made him sit back down despite every cell in his body wanting to chase Rosie across the restaurant. Wait, Daddy, just wait. So Nathan waited, his heart hammering with the particular anxiety of a parent watching their child walk toward an unknown situation, and watched his daughter approach a woman he didn't know. He didn't know that the woman's name was Vivian Cole, that she worked the night shift in the emergency room at Cook County, that her hands were rough from latex gloves and institutional soap, that she had given up medical school to care for a dying mother and had been paying for that sacrifice in quiet ways ever since. He didn't know that she lived in a studio apartment in Pilsen that was smaller than his master bathroom, or that she had been sitting at that table for 47 minutes waiting for a man she had never met, who had decided via text message that she was too much trouble to meet in person. All Nathan knew was that his 7-year-old was about to talk to a stranger, and that he was powerless to stop it without making a scene, and that the woman by the window looked exactly the way he felt most nights after the girls fell asleep and the penthouse went quiet, and the city spread out below him like a kingdom he had conquered and found empty. Vivian Cole had not planned to spend Christmas Eve crying in an Italian restaurant. She had planned to spend it on a date, her first in over 2 years, arranged by her colleague Diane, who had finally worn down Vivian's resistance with the persistence of someone who believed that single women over 30 were a problem to be solved. "He's a doctor," Diane had said, as if the profession itself were a guarantee of character. "Internal medicine at Northwestern. Smart, age-appropriate, recently divorced, looking for someone real." Vivian had agreed because the alternative was her 4th consecutive Christmas Eve alone in the studio on 18th Street with a can of soup and whatever was playing on the second-hand television she had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago when her old one finally died. She had agreed because somewhere beneath the armor, she had spent a decade welding together the independence that looked like strength but felt like isolation, the self-sufficiency that had kept her alive, but was slowly killing something softer inside her. There was still a woman who wanted to sit across from someone on Christmas Eve and feel like she mattered. The text had arrived in a pattern she would later recognize as a coward's retreat, each message a little more distant, a little more dishonest, the slow withdrawal of someone who had already decided but lacked the courage to say so directly. 5:47. Running a bit behind, be there soon. 6:15, traffic is terrible, so sorry. 6:42, the killing blow delivered with the casual cruelty of a man who had never considered that words on a screen could draw blood. "I don't think this is going to work out. You seem lovely, but I'm not ready for this level of intensity. Best wishes." Level of intensity. He had never met her, had never sat across from her, had never heard her laugh, or watched her hands move when she talked, or learned that she organized her spice rack alphabetically because her mother had done it that way, and it was one of the few habits Vivian had inherited that didn't make her chest ache. He had Googled her, that was the only explanation. Found her sparse social media, her LinkedIn that listed nothing more impressive than RN Cook County Emergency Department, and decided that whatever he saw was not worth driving through snow on Christmas Eve. Not enough, not interesting enough, not successful enough, not worth the effort of showing up. The truly pathetic part, the part that made Vivian press her knuckles against her eyes and Well, the tears back down was that she had dressed carefully, had stood in front of the small mirror in her studio for 20 minutes, trying on the three tops she owned that weren't scrubs or sleep shirts, settling on the nicest sweater she had, the one she saved for occasions that required looking like she had her life together. She had walked to the L station in the cold ridden. The train downtown arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality was one of the values her mother had impressed upon her alongside kindness and the absolute refusal to quit. And now she was sitting here 47 minutes past the time he was supposed to arrive, still holding on to the wine that Sal, the kind older waiter who had noticed her sitting alone and brought it without being asked, from the restaurant Miss Merry Christmas, because this small glass of someone else's compassion was the only gift she had received today, and she could not bring herself to leave it unfinished. She should go. There was no reason to stay in this restaurant, surrounded by happy families and couples and groups of friends, a living monument to her own failure at the one thing that seemed to come easily to everyone else: human connection, the simple act of being wanted by another person. She reached for her phone one last time, ready to order a rideshare back to Pilsen, when a small voice beside her said the words that would rearrange the rest of her life. "Excuse me, miss?" She looked down and found a child. Dark curls, eyes enormous and serious in a small face, red velvet dress that had been chosen with obvious care. Maybe 7 years old, maybe 8, carrying herself with the particular gravity of a child who had something important to say and fully intended to say it regardless of whether she had permission. "Yes. Are you okay? You look really shy and it's Christmas Eve and nobody should be tired on Christmas Eve." Vivian opened her mouth to deliver the polite deflection she had perfected over years of unwanted conversations in hospital waiting rooms and grocery store checkout lines, the automatic smile and reassurance that kept people at arm's length where they belonged. But the child's eyes held no agenda, no curiosity dressed as concern, no pity wearing the mask of kindness, just pure, uncomplicated worry, the kind of worry that children feel before the world teaches them to ration it. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." "You don't look fine." More brutal, beautiful honesty. "You look like you're about to cry. Are you waiting for someone who didn't come?" A male voice from across the restaurant, sharp with embarrassment. "Rosie, come back here. Right now." Vivian looked up and saw a man approaching, tall, dark-haired, moving with the purposeful stride of a parent about to apologize profusely. She registered details the way she registered patient information in the ER, automatically, clinically, in layers. The suit was expensive, cut well, the fabric catching light in a way that cheap cloth never did. But his face told a different story. Handsome beneath the exhaustion, with shadows under eyes that were a striking shade of blue-green, a small scar on his chin, and laugh lines around his mouth that suggested he had once been someone who smiled easily and often and had somewhere along the way forgotten how. He was looking at Vivian with an expression she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror, the apologetic panic of someone whose child had just breached a social barrier that adults spent their whole lives maintaining. "I'm so sorry. She doesn't mean to bother you. Rosie, we've talked about this. You can't just—" "She's not bothering me." Vivian heard herself say it and was surprised to find she meant it. She looked back at the child Rosie, who was watching her with the unflinching patience of someone who had asked a question and was still waiting for a real answer. "Are you eating alone?" Rosie pressed, and Vivian saw the father close his eyes briefly, a man petitioning the universe for patience he suspected it would not provide. "Yes, I am." On Christmas Eve, a second voice, and there was a second child approaching, identical to the first down to the red velvet dress. Twins. The second one moved more carefully than the first, studying Vivian with an analytical intensity that felt older than her years. "That's terrible." The father's voice had taken on the firm tone of someone who had reached the end of his patience, though gentleness still ran beneath it like a current. "Chloe, Rosie, back to the table. Now." He crouched to his daughter's level, positioning himself unconsciously between them and the stranger, protective, automatic, the body language of a man who had been the only barrier between his children and the world for a very long time. "What have we talked about? Personal boundaries." The girls chanted in rehearsed unison. "Everyone has them, and we should respect them." "Right, so we're going back to our table and letting this nice lady enjoy her evening." "But she's all alone." Chloe, the quieter one, the observer, spoke with a conviction that carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. And you always say nobody should be alone on Christmas if they don't want to be. Something shifted in his jaw, a tightening. Vivian watched him absorb the impact of his own words being used against him by a 7-year-old with a better moral compass than most adults she had met in 34 years of living. He stood turning to Vivian with an expression that mixed apology with resignation, with something else, a flicker of recognition perhaps. Two lonely people seeing each other clearly for the first time. Look, I'm sorry about this. They mean well. We come here every Christmas Eve, and it's usually just the three of us, and they've apparently decided to expand our party without consulting management. A pause, the flicker again stronger now. If you'd like to join us, you'd be welcome. But please don't feel obligated. My daughters are enthusiastic, but they'll survive the disappointment if you'd prefer to eat alone. Vivian should say no. She should thank them politely. Protect her pride, her privacy, her solitude that had become so familiar. It almost felt like a choice instead of a sentence. She should finish her wine and take the train back to Pilsen and spend Christmas Eve the way she had spent every Christmas Eve since her mother died alone, convincing herself she preferred it. Instead, she found herself looking at this tired father and his persistent daughters and feeling something she had not felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it, a genuine desire to be around other people. Not the performative socialization of hospital break rooms or the obligatory small talk of the L train. Something real, something warm, something that had walked up to her table in red velvet dresses and asked if she was okay and meant it. I wouldn't want to intrude. You wouldn't be. Chloe immediately, definitively. I'm sure, the father added, and something in his voice suggested he understood precisely how much courage it took to say yes to an unexpected invitation when you had spent years building walls designed to make invitations impossible. Come on, Sal will be thrilled to have another order. Vivian stood. She gathered her wine glass and the small purse that contained her phone and her CTA card and her hospital ID and approximately $43 in cash, which was what remained of her last paycheck after rent and utilities and the student loan payments she was still making on a degree she had never finished. She followed this stranger and his daughters back to their corner booth, while other diners watched with undisguised curiosity, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the vulnerability of accepting kindness from people who owed her nothing. I'm Vivian. She slid into the booth beside Rosie while Chloe bounced back to her father's side. Nathan Hale. He settled into his seat with the careful movement of a man reassembling his composure. And you've already met Rosie and Chloe, who apparently have no sense of social appropriateness. We have lots of social appropriateness, Rosie protested. We just saw someone who needed help. I'm not sure I needed help. Even as Vivian said it, she recognized the lie. She had needed help. She had needed someone to see her. And two children had done what an entire restaurant full of adults had not. They had noticed. Chloe's response carried the weight of inherited wisdom. Everyone needs help sometimes. That's what Daddy says. He says there's no shame in needing people, only in pretending you don't. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, the particular discomfort of a man hearing his own private philosophy quoted back to him in a public setting by someone 3 feet tall. I also say it's polite to let people eat their dinner in peace. We're eating in peace, just together. Sal appeared with bruschetta and breadsticks and chocolate milk for the twins, his professional demeanor barely concealing surprise at the new arrangement. He called Nathan Mr. Hale casually, naturally, and the name caught in Vivian's ear for a moment before dissolving. She did not read business magazines. She did not follow Forbes lists. At 3 in the morning in the emergency room, when she was holding pressure on a laceration or calming a child with a broken arm or trying to stay awake through the 15th hour of a double shift, she did not Google CEOs of construction conglomerates. The name meant nothing to her. What she did notice was the gap between them. The quality of his suit fabric visible even in candlelight. The way he ordered without glancing at prices, the unconscious ease of someone for whom money had long since stopped being a consideration. Vivian looked at her own hands. The roughness from constant washing, the short nails mandated by hospital protocol, the small scar on her left thumb from a scalpel slip during her second week in the ER. 2 different planets sitting across the same table. But the breadsticks dissolved the distance. Vivian took a bite and the flavor warm buttery, dusted with garlic and herbs, hit her with a force that had nothing to do with cuisine and everything to do with the fact that she had not eaten a proper meal today because she had been too nervous about the date and then too devastated by its cancellation. Oh my God, these are incredible. Rosie's triumph was immediate and total. Told you, best in the whole world. The whole world, that's a big claim. Chloe measured as always. We've had breadsticks at 7 different restaurants. These are definitely the best. A proper scientific study. Sample size is small, but the methodology is sound. Nathan laughed. Short, unexpected, genuine, and the transformation startled Vivian. The exhaustion lifted from his face like fog burning off a lake, and beneath it she glimpsed someone else entirely. Someone who had been funny once, who had laughed easily, who had loved the sound of his own laughter before something had stolen it from him. Are you a scientist? Rosie leaned forward, interested in everything always. Not exactly. I'm a nurse, emergency room. Both girls went wide-eyed. Nathan, for the first time, looked at Vivian with something beyond polite attention, something that contained the beginning of respect. You save people, Chloe asked the question as though the answer determined everything. I try, not always successfully. That's the most important job in the whole world, Rosie declared with the absolute authority of childhood. Nathan's nod was small but unmistakable. She's right about that. They wanted to know more. Vivian offered carefully chosen pieces a boy with a broken arm from sledding last night. Very brave. Rosie erupted. I broke my arm. Once Daddy panicked worse than me, Nathan dry. I didn't panic. I responded decisively. Chloe devastating. Daddy cried in the car. That was allergies. And Vivian laughed, really laughed. The sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time laughter had come from her belly instead of her throat, the last time it had felt like release instead of performance. Nathan asked about her life, and Vivian offered what she could without making it sound like a plea for sympathy. She had grown up on the South Side, studied pre-med, did well, got into medical school, left during her 3rd year to care for her mother, cancer, stage 3, 2 years of treatment, that was really 2 years of goodbye. Her mother passed 4 years ago. Vivian went back to nursing because it was the fastest path to a paycheck, and the bills from medical school were still coming whether she finished or not. She told it flat without embellishment, the way she charted patient histories, facts in sequence, no editorializing. But Nathan heard what she left out, the dream she had abandoned, the debt she still carried, the way she said nursing instead of medicine, with a flinch so small that only someone who had spent years hiding his own pain would catch it. Rosie wanted to know why Vivian became a nurse instead of a doctor. Vivian considered the question with the seriousness it deserved because children's questions always deserve seriousness. Sometimes life doesn't give you the road you want. It gives you the road you need, and that road has value too. She felt Nathan's gaze sharpen across the table. Something in those blue-green eyes shifted, as if he had just seen something in her that money could not purchase: dignity in adversity, the particular kind of strength that didn't announce itself. They talked about Nathan briefly, carefully. He said he worked in construction, mostly managing now. Vivian asked if he meant job sites. Something like that. He did not say CEO, did not say $3 billion, did not mention the billboard advertisements that bore his company's name on construction sites across the city. He talked about coaching the girls' soccer team, despite having no athletic ability whatsoever, about his best friend Jake, who was terrible at poker, but kept playing anyway, about the house traditions that held their small family together. Vivian recognized what he was doing because she did it too, curating, choosing which pieces of yourself to reveal and which to lock away, building a version of your life that was true but incomplete, offering enough to connect without enough to be fully known. Then Chloe asked her question, the one that cracked something open. Were you crying before when you were sitting alone? The table went quiet. Even Rosie stopped reaching for a breadstick, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, the way animals sense an approaching storm. Nathan intervened immediately. That's private, Chloe. You don't ask people why they're crying. I didn't ask why, I asked if. Nathan opened his mouth to argue the distinction, then closed it, recognizing a losing battle. Vivian could lie, should lie. But there was something about these children, about this moment, that demanded the kind of honesty she usually reserved for 3 in the morning in an empty break room, when the shift had been brutal and her defenses were down. Yes, I was. Why, Rosie direct as a scalpel. Some things are not ours to know. Nathan's voice carried the weight of a man who had learned this lesson through years of people asking him well-meaning questions about Claire that he did not have the strength to answer. Vivian overrode him gently. It's okay. I was supposed to meet someone here tonight. A date. Someone I'd never met before. He didn't show up. Texted me to say he changed his mind. That's mean, Chloe pronounced with the absolute moral clarity that only children possess, the kind of judgment unclouded by adult rationalizations about complexity and nuance, and seeing both sides. That's extremely mean. Rosie agreed, her small face flushed with indignation on behalf of someone she had known for less than 20 minutes. You're really pretty and nice, and he doesn't even know you. He's dumb. Vivian felt herself smile despite everything, the warmth of it catching her off guard. Nathan's voice was quiet but carried an edge. She's right. That was a coward's move. If he changed his mind, he should have had the decency to tell you in person, or at least call. Maybe he was intimidated. Nathan's blue-green eyes held hers across the table, and his response landed with the precision of someone who had spent years building structures designed to bear enormous weight. Intimidation is just fear wearing a nice suit. It's not a legitimate reason for anything. Something passed between them, a frequency of understanding that required no translation. Two people who had been disappointed by the world in different ways, recognizing the same wound in each other. Rosie pushed further, as Rosie always pushed further. Have you ever been stood Daddy? Nathan's hand froze halfway to his water glass. The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. Not exactly, but I've had people cancel plans at the last minute. Chloe quieter than her sister, but more precise. Because of Mommy. The word hung in the air between them. Nathan went very still, the particular stillness of a man bracing for impact, the same way Vivian had seen trauma patients go still in the seconds before they allowed themselves to feel the pain. The twins watched their father with the careful attention of children who had learned to read parental moods, the way farmers read weather constantly, automatically, because their survival depended on it. We don't have to talk about that tonight. Maybe we just enjoy our dinner and our new friend. It's fine, Vivian interrupted, meaning it. Really, if there's something important, don't stop on my account. Nathan looked at her for a long time. She watched him make calculations, how much to share, how much to protect, whether this stranger could handle the heaviest thing he carried. Their mother passed away. His voice flattened, adopting the particular tonelessness that people use when discussing the worst thing that has ever happened to them, as though removing all inflection could somehow remove the pain. 7 years ago, complications during childbirth. The girls never met her. Vivian did not say, I'm sorry. She had heard that phrase hundreds of times after her own mother died, and each time it had felt like a small, smooth stone, well-intentioned, useless, incapable of filling any hole. Instead, she sat with the silence for a moment, letting it breathe the way she sat with families in the ER when the news was bad and words were worse than nothing. Then she spoke. She sounds like she was extraordinary. Nathan's eyes changed. Something behind them, some locked door, opened a crack. She was extraordinary. A pause, and his voice softened into something that sounded like love preserved in amber. She was also stubborn and funny, and a terrible Parker. Hit the same mailbox 3 times in 1 week. On purpose. I honestly couldn't tell you. And there it was again, the ghost of a laugh, the suggestion that grief and fondness could occupy the same breath. Chloe studied Vivian with those 2 old eyes. You lost someone too, didn't you? Vivian didn't flinch. My mom. 4 years ago. Nathan's gaze held hers over the heads of his daughters, and what passed between them needed no words. The recognition of shared membership in a club that no one volunteers to join, the fraternity of people who have buried someone they loved and learned to keep walking anyway, not because they were brave, but because the alternative was lying down and never getting up. The conversation eventually turned lighter, carried by the twins' irrepressible energy, and the arrival of entrees, chicken parmesan, for Nathan, spaghetti for the girls, the dinner special for Vivian, who ordered the least expensive thing on the menu without looking at the price because she knew instinctively that this man was paying and she could not afford to owe anyone anything. She watched Nathan close his eyes at his first bite of chicken, watched something move across his face that was not about flavor, but about memory, and understood without being told that this dish belonged to someone who was gone. They ate. They talked. The twins told Vivian about soccer. They were terrible, had scored on their own goal twice this season. About school, Rosie wanted to be a veterinarian. Chloe couldn't decide between astronaut and professional soccer player. About Uncle Jake, who was apparently terrible at poker and also at cooking ham. Nathan told Vivian carefully selected details about his work, construction, consulting, project management, that were technically true and strategically incomplete. Vivian told them about the ER, about the boy with the broken arm, about the time she had accidentally worn her scrub top inside out for an entire 12-hour shift, and nobody told her until the end. She did not tell them about the student loans, about the studio apartment with the radiator that worked only intermittently, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like drowning in a room full of people who were all breathing fine. She did not tell them that sitting here in this modest Italian restaurant with this exhausted father and his extraordinary daughters eating food she hadn't paid for and laughing at jokes that weren't particularly clever, but were offered with genuine warmth. She felt more at home than she had felt in 4 years. Near the end of the meal, as dessert arrived, tiramisu for the table, Chloe asked the question that would change everything. "What are you doing tomorrow for Christmas?" "Chloe," Nathan's warning tone returned. "I was just asking." Vivian smiled, knowing what was coming. "I'm working, actually. I have the afternoon shift at the hospital. There's always something that needs doing." Both twins looked horrified. "On Christmas? I'm not very good at holidays. I don't have family nearby, and most of my friends have their own plans. So I usually just pick up extra shifts." The girls looked at their father with identical expressions of fierce determination. Vivian watched Nathan's face shift through a sequence of emotions, surprise, hesitation, the particular fear of a man who has been living safely inside grief for 7 years and feels the walls beginning to move. Then something else surfaced. Not resignation. Something that looked against all his protective instincts, like the faintest beginning of hope. "You should come to our house for Christmas morning." Rosie, of course. "We make pancakes," Chloe added, "and open presents, and Uncle Jake comes over and burns stuff." "I don't burn anything. Jake burns things. I've asked him to stop helping, but he insists." "You should come," Rosie repeated, looking at Vivian with such earnest hope that Vivian felt her walls, the carefully maintained barriers she had spent a decade constructing, take another hit. "That's very sweet, but I'm sure your father would rather have Christmas with just his family." Nathan interrupted, and his voice carried a steadiness that surprised even him. "You'd be welcome, I mean it. If you don't have other plans, and if you don't mind chaos and burned pancakes and 2 kids who wake up at 5 regardless of how many times I explain the concept of sleeping in, you'd be welcome." 8 o'clock. Vivian opened her mouth to decline. "That was what you did. You declined invitations from strangers. You protected your pride. You maintained boundaries. You did not follow a man you had just met and his 7-year-old daughters into a life that was not yours, no matter how warm it felt, no matter how badly you wanted to sit down inside it and never leave." "What time did you say?" The girls cheered. Nathan smiled, a real one this time, reaching his eyes, transforming his whole face, and Vivian realized she had just agreed to spend Christmas morning with complete strangers, and for the first time in 4 years, she was actually looking forward to tomorrow. They exchanged phone numbers. Nathan paid the bill before Vivian could protest his card already, with Sal the transaction completed before she even saw a check. She reached for her purse anyway. "I'd like to pay my share." He met her eyes. "You're our guest, and my daughters invited you. Dinner's handled. I don't like owing people." His response was gentle and absolute, the voice of a man who understood something about her that she had not yet said aloud. "This is Christmas dinner, not a contract. Sometimes people give each other something without asking for anything back." Vivian held his gaze and felt the truth of it settle into her chest like something warm. She did not know how to receive without calculating the cost. That was one of the things she would have to learn. They gathered their things. The girls bundled into coats and hats, Nathan helping with zippers, his large hands careful on small buttons. Vivian put on her jacket, warm enough, practical, bought on sale 3 winters ago. Outside, the snow was still falling, heavier now, coating the city in white. Nathan's driver had pulled the SUV to the curb. The interior light glowed warm and golden. "Do you need a ride? We can drop you." Vivian looked at the SUV, black polished leather interior, visible through the open door, a vehicle that probably cost more than she would earn in 2 years. The distance between their worlds, already evident inside the restaurant, now stood in the street between them, 4,000 pounds of German engineering and tinted glass. "I'll take the L stations close. It's Christmas Eve. It's snowing. I take the train every day. A little snow won't hurt." She caught herself adding almost involuntarily, "Mr. Hale," and the formality created a distance she hadn't intended or perhaps had. "Nathan, just Nathan." She nodded. Then Rosie threw her arms around Vivian's waist, quick, fierce, the hug of a child who had not yet learned to ration affection. Chloe followed more carefully, but with a grip that carried its own quiet intensity. Vivian stood on the snowy sidewalk with two small bodies pressed against her, their warmth cutting through her jacket and her skin, and the layers of carefully maintained isolation beneath, reaching something she had thought was beyond reach. They separated. Nathan watched her with an expression she couldn't read, or perhaps didn't want to. Then the girls climbed into the SUV, and he followed, one hand raised in a half-wave that was somewhere between goodbye and a promise. Vivian walked to the L station. The platform was nearly empty, Christmas Eve, most people already where they belonged. She stood alone under the yellow lights, snow collecting on her shoulders, and waited for a train that would take her back to Pilsen, to the studio, to the silence. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Nathan. The girls made me text to make sure you got home safe. Also, they want to know if you are really coming tomorrow, and Rosie needs to know if you want chocolate chip pancakes or plain." Vivian stood on this platform and typed her response with numb fingers, smiling alone in the cold, the way people smile when something unexpected has happened, and they haven't yet decided whether to trust it. "Home safe. I'll be there. Chocolate chip." On the train, watching the snow-covered neighborhoods of Chicago slide past the dirty windows, she thought about the evening, about a child who had walked up to a stranger and asked if she was okay, about a father who had opened his table despite every protective instinct, telling him to keep his daughters close and his world small, about breadsticks that tasted like belonging, and a name Claire spoken with love that had outlived the person it was meant for, about chicken parmesan ordered as a memorial. She did not know that the man who had bought her dinner ran a company worth $3 billion. Did not know that the penthouse she would walk into tomorrow morning looked out over Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows, or that the doorman would change his entire demeanor when she said Nathan's name, or that the elevator would open directly into an apartment so large and so beautiful and so empty that it would take her breath away and break her heart simultaneously. She did not know any of this. All she knew was that she had been seen, that two small girls had looked at her and recognized loneliness, and instead of looking away the way adults do, the way she herself had looked away from 1,000 lonely people, in 1,000 waiting rooms, they had walked toward it. In the bottom of the SUV, heading toward Gold Coast, Nathan stared at the snow falling past the window and felt something shift inside him that had been locked in place for 7 years. The driver glanced in the rear view. "Home, Mr. Hale." Nathan thought about Vivian walking to the train in the snow, about the roughness of her hands and the steadiness of her voice, and the way she had not said "I'm sorry" when he told her about Claire, had instead sat with the silence and then said exactly the right thing, the thing no one else had ever said. He thought about his daughter's instincts, how they had seen what he had seen and acted on it with a courage he had lost somewhere in the wreckage of the past 7 years. Rosie's voice from the back seat, already drowsy. "She's nice, Daddy." Chloe quieter. "She understood about Mommy. Did you see? She didn't say sorry like everyone else. She knew not to." Nathan closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the leather seat. Claire would have liked Vivian. Claire would have recognized the strength in her, the particular resilience of a woman who had been knocked down repeatedly and kept standing. Claire would have laughed at him gently the way she laughed at all his fears and told him to stop building walls around himself. He wasn't a building. He didn't need load-bearing walls. He needed windows. "She's nice," Nathan agreed, and the admission cost him more than any acquisition he had ever signed. Vivian did not know that Nathan Hale was worth more than every person who had dined at Fontana's that evening combined. Nathan did not know that Vivian Cole owned exactly two pairs of shoes that weren't hospital mandated, or that her refrigerator contained a can of soup and a half-empty carton of milk, or that she had baked cookies at 5 in the morning because she could not afford a proper gift and refused to arrive empty-handed. Neither of them knew what the other carried: the weight of wealth that bought everything except connection, the weight of poverty that could not afford to let anyone in. All they knew as the snow continued falling over Chicago on Christmas Eve, as the city quieted toward midnight, and the lights along Michigan Avenue reflected off the fresh white ground like earthbound stars, was that two lonely people had found an unexpected moment of warmth over breadsticks and bruschetta in a corner booth, and that two 7-year-old girls with more courage than sense had made it possible. And sometimes, not always, not often, but sometimes that is enough. Tomorrow, when Vivian would step into the lobby of Nathan's Gold Coast building and feel the marble floors beneath her worn boots, when the elevator would open into a penthouse that could swallow her entire life twice over, when the distance between their worlds would become undeniable and terrifying, and real tomorrow would bring its own reckoning. But tonight, on the train heading south through the snow, Vivian Cole allowed herself something she had not allowed in a very long time. She allowed herself to hope. And in a black SUV heading north, Nathan Hale, CEO, billionaire father widower, the man who had built skyscrapers, but could not build himself a bridge back to the living, sat between his sleeping daughters and stared at the snow and thought about a woman with rough hands and steady eyes who had not said "I'm sorry" and had meant every word she did say, and wondered what Claire would think of what their girls had done tonight. He already knew the answer. She would have been proud. Vivian woke at 6:30 on Christmas morning in her studio apartment on 18th Street, staring at a ceiling stain shaped vaguely like the state of Ohio, and seriously considered not going. The radiator was clicking its irregular rhythm, the only sound in a room that contained everything she owned and still felt half empty. She could text Nathan, claim a stomach bug, apologize, disappear back into the comfortable misery she had built for herself like a fort made of blankets, flimsy, temporary, but familiar enough to feel like safety. He would understand. He would probably be relieved. What kind of man invites a stranger to Christmas morning after knowing her for 2 hours? What kind of woman accepts? She threw off the thin comforter and stood on the cold floor in bare feet, crossing to the closet that was really just a metal rack bolted to the wall. 20 minutes she stood there, which was 18 minutes longer than she usually spent choosing clothes, because usually the choice was scrubs or not a scrubs, and the decision made itself. Everything she owned, it looked exactly like what it was: the wardrobe of a woman who spent her money on rent and loan payments and groceries in that order, with nothing left over for the kind of casual elegance that said, "I have my life together," instead of "I am surviving." She settled on her cleanest jeans, the navy sweater she had bought at a clearance rack 2 winters ago, and the boots that had a scuff on the left toe but were otherwise presentable. She studied herself in the bathroom mirror, small spotted with age, mounted above a sink that dripped, and saw a woman who looked exactly like what she was: a night shift ER nurse on her day off, trying to pass for someone who belonged in a world she had never entered. The cookies she had baked at 5 in the morning sat on the kitchen counter in a tin she had washed and reused from last year's hospital holiday exchange. Sugar cookies, slightly burnt on the edges because her oven ran hot and she could not afford to replace the thermostat. She had mixed the dough at 4 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about the evening at Fontana's. She could not afford a proper gift, but showing up empty-handed was unthinkable. Her mother had raised her with the absolute conviction that you brought something when you went to someone's home, even if that something was imperfect, because the offering mattered more than the object. She packed the cookies alongside the other gifts, a set of coloring books and a new box of crayons, for the girls purchased 3 days ago at the dollar store, when she still thought Christmas would be spent alone, and had bought them on impulse, thinking vaguely of the children's ward at the hospital, where small gifts sometimes made enormous differences. They were modest. They were what she could afford. They would have to be enough. The L train was nearly empty on Christmas morning. Vivian sat in a window seat and watched the neighborhoods change through glass that needed cleaning, Pilson's murals and taquerias giving way to the loop's steel and stone, then northward into territory she rarely visited, where the buildings grew taller and the streets grew quieter, and the cars parked along the curbs cost more than her annual salary. She got off at the Clark and Division stop and walked 3 blocks through fresh snow to an address that turned out to be a limestone building with a green awning and a doorman in a uniform that looked like it had been pressed that morning by someone who took pressing seriously. The doorman studied her quick professional, the assessment of a man trained to distinguish between residents and problems. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Nathan Hale." The transformation was immediate. The professional courtesy sharpened into something warmer, more attentive. "Of course, ma'am. Elevator on your right. Penthouse level. I'll let Mr. Hale know you're coming up." He pressed the button for her, and Vivian stepped into an elevator lined with mirrors and dark wood that smelled like cedar and money. The doors closed, and she caught her reflection, multiplied infinitely, in the facing mirrors, an endless regression of a woman in a clearance sweater, holding a tin of burnt cookies, riding an elevator that probably cost more to install than her entire education. The doors opened directly into the apartment, and Vivian's breath left her. The penthouse was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, framing Lake Michigan in a panorama that looked painted gray, water-white sky snow, falling in slow motion against the glass. The ceilings soared, the floors were pale hardwood. The kitchen was a showpiece of marble and professional-grade steel. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, professionally decorated in silver and white, beautiful and untouched, the kind of tree that existed to be photographed rather than loved. But beside it, leaning slightly to the left, was a second smaller tree, this one covered in handmade ornaments, construction, paper snowflakes, photographs laminated in plastic, a star on top made of painted cardboard and glitter. Two trees, one for appearances, one for living. The smaller tree had wrapping paper scattered beneath it. Boxes opened the evidence of children who had been awake for hours. The space was stunning, and it was cold. Not in temperature, the heating worked perfectly. Of course it did, but in the way that enormous rooms feel when only 3 people live in them. Vivian recognized the emptiness because she lived with its mirror image. Her studio was small and sparse. This penthouse was vast and sparse. Both felt the same, the absence of enough people to fill the space. She came. Rosie's voice shattered the silence like a rock through glass, and then both girls were running toward her in matching red pajamas, faces bright with the particular frenzy of Christmas morning. Chloe was slightly behind her sister, but her smile was just as wide. They grabbed Vivian's hands sticky with what had to be candy and pulled her inside with the force of 2 small engines operating at maximum throttle. "We thought maybe you wouldn't come." Chloe honest as always. "Of course I came, I promised." Nathan appeared from the kitchen wearing jeans and a faded Boston College sweatshirt that had clearly served years of faithful duty. A dish towel hung over one shoulder. His hair was damp, his feet bare, and without the suit he looked younger, more human, more like the man behind the CEO, rather than the CEO himself. "You actually came." Something in his voice, a crack in the careful control, told Vivian he had been expecting the cancellation text too. "I don't usually back out of commitments. Most people wouldn't consider Christmas with strangers a commitment. I'm not most people." The girls pulled her toward the small tree, eager to show every present in detail. Vivian knelt on the hardwood floor and examined each item with appropriate seriousness, while Rosie provided running commentary and Chloe offered quieter, more precise assessments. A Lego castle set 472 pieces, a soccer ball signed by the Chicago Fire. Uncle Jake has connections. Uncle Jake knows a guy who knows a guy. A chemistry kit, books, art supplies. The abundance was staggering, not ostentatious, but clearly the gifts of a father who had the means to give his children everything and the love to choose carefully what they actually wanted. Vivian handed over her gifts, the coloring books and crayons wrapped in newspaper because she didn't own wrapping paper. The girls tore them open with genuine delight that either broke Vivian's heart or healed it, she couldn't tell which. "New crayons," Rosie shouted, as though 64 colors in a fresh box were the most valuable things she had received all morning. And maybe they were in the way that matters, given by someone who had chosen them with thought rather than budget. Then Vivian offered Nathan the tin. "I baked these at 5 this morning. They're a little burnt on the edges." He opened the tin, took a cookie, bit into it. His eyes changed the same way they had changed last night over the chicken parmesan, but different, softer, as though the flavor contained not a ghost, but a possibility. "These are good, really good." Neither of them said what both of them felt, that these cookies, imperfect, baked in a malfunctioning oven by a woman who had spent her grocery budget on butter and sugar because she could not bear to arrive without something made by her own hands, were the first gift anyone had given Nathan Hale in 7 years that was not purchased but created. The first thing offered not from a catalog but from a kitchen, not from wealth but from care. The elevator chimed and the peace shattered. Jake Brennan filled the doorway the way he filled every doorway, 6'3" built, like someone who had played defensive end in college and kept most of the muscle-shaved head, a beard that had abandoned all discipline during the holidays. He carried a bag of presents in one arm and a ham in the other, and his entrance was a controlled explosion of volume and affection. "Merry Christmas, you magnificent disasters. Where are my girls?" The twins launched themselves at him with enough force to make a lesser man stagger. Jake caught them both one under each arm and spun them around while they shrieked. Then he saw Vivian. The shift was instant. Jovial to analytical in the space of a heartbeat, his eyes narrowing not with hostility, but with the protective calculation of a man who had spent 5 years as Nathan's COO and understood exactly how many people approached his friend with ulterior motives. He set the girls down without breaking his gaze. "Well, who do we have here?" Nathan's introduction carried an undertone of warning. "Jake, this is Vivian. Vivian, Jake Brennan. Best friend, business partner, world's nosiest human being." Jake's handshake was firm and measured. "Vivian, nice name. How do you know Nathan?" "We met at the restaurant last night. His daughters invited me to dinner." "They invited you," Jake repeated, looking at Nathan. "The girls invited a complete stranger to Christmas. It sounds worse when you say it like that. And you just agreed to come." Jake's attention swung back to Vivian, not unkind, but thorough. "No family plans, no boyfriend waiting." Nathan's voice carried an edge. "Jake, what I'm asking, the normal questions that normal people ask when strangers show up on Christmas morning." He caught himself softened by a fraction. "The date, last night. What happened?" He stood her up, Rosie supplied helpfully from floor level. "He was dumb and mean." Jake's expression darkened with a sincerity that cut through his interrogation. "He stood you up on Christmas Eve. What kind of—" A glance at the twins. "Person does that. Apparently the kind who thinks I'm too intense." Vivian heard the dryness in her own voice and let it stay. Self-pity was not a garment she wore well. His loss. Jake said it quickly, simply, and something in his delivery suggested that while he was reserving judgment, the first data point had landed in Vivian's favor. He clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "All right, let's get coffee before you burn something." "I don't burn things, you burn things." They moved to the kitchen, and it was there in the easy chaos of coffee being poured and pancake batter being argued over, and two children attempting to convince four adults that chocolate chips counted as a breakfast food group, that the morning unraveled its next revelation. Jake leaned against the counter with his mug, watching Vivian the way a man watches someone he is still deciding about. Casual tone, careful question. "So Vivian, what do you do?" "I'm a nurse, emergency room, Cook County." Jake's eyebrows lifted, not with the surprise of someone who had expected something else, but with the recognition of someone who understood what that job demanded. "Cook County ER, that's no joke. It keeps me busy." "Busy," Jake repeated as if the word were comically inadequate for 12-hour overnight shifts in one of the busiest trauma centers in the Midwest. He opened his mouth to ask something else when his phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with the reflex of a man who ran the daily operations of a $3 billion company even on Christmas morning. He set it down, but not before Vivian caught the lock screen a photo of Jake with Nathan at what appeared to be a construction gala, both in tuxedos, a banner behind them reading, "Hale Construction Group building tomorrow." She looked at the banner, looked at Nathan, who was focused on not burning pancakes, looked at the penthouse, really looked at it this time with the clinical eye she used in the ER to assess situations quickly. The art on the walls was original, not prints. The appliances were commercial grade. The view of Lake Michigan was not a view you could buy for less than several $1,000,000. The doorman who changed posture at Nathan's name. The elevator that opened into a private residence. Jake's mention of stock prices and board meetings. "You're the CEO." Vivian's voice was flat diagnostic, the same tone she used when reading vital signs that had suddenly turned critical. "Hale Construction, the company on the billboards all over the city." Nathan set down the spatula. He turned to face her and she could see him calculating how to explain, how to minimize, how to keep her from doing exactly what her body was already starting to do, which was to move toward the elevator. Yes, $3 billion. She had seen the number somewhere, a bus at a newspaper, the side of a building, going up on Wacker Drive. The number had meant nothing to her then. It meant everything now. The company is. I should go. She set her coffee mug on the counter with precision, the way she set instruments on surgical trays. Everything in its place, no wasted motion. Thank you for breakfast. Nathan's voice held a steadiness that cost him visibly. Why? The word stopped her because it was honest, and she owed him honesty in return. Because this is not my world. Penthouses and doormen and elevators that open into apartments. I'm a night shift ER nurse with a studio in Pilsen and $43 in my checking account. I don't belong in this kitchen, Nathan. And I won't be the feel-good story billionaire takes pity on the poor nurse at Christmas. The silence that followed had weight. Jake stood very still by the counter, coffee forgotten. The twins had gone quiet in the living room, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, the way children always do their play, suspended mid-motion. Nathan did not raise his voice, did not step toward her or away. He stood in his own kitchen, barefoot in a college sweatshirt holding a spatula, and spoke with the measured precision of a man who built structures designed to withstand enormous pressure. I didn't invite you because I pity you. My daughters invited you because they saw someone in pain and decided to do something about it. I agreed because I know what it feels like to sit in a room full of people and be completely alone. This penthouse, the company, the doorman, none of that is who I am. It's what I built because building things was easier than feeling things after Claire died. You want to know who I am? I'm a man who has been ordering the same meal every Christmas Eve for 7 years because his dead wife loved it and he doesn't know how to let go. That's who's standing in this kitchen. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, just a father who can't cook pancakes and whose daughters have better instincts than he does. Two small figures appeared in the kitchen doorway. Rosie direct as always, you can't leave, you just got here. Chloe quieter carried a glass of water to Vivian and held it out without speaking. Then in a voice that was too old for her face, Daddy gets scared of good things. He thinks they'll be taken away. Because Mommy was. The glass of water, the gesture undid something in Vivian that the words alone could not have reached the simple, unprompted act of a 7-year-old bringing comfort to a stranger, not because anyone asked, but because she saw someone who needed it. That was what Vivian did every night in the ER. She brought water to frighten people. She held hands. She showed up. And now a child was doing it for her. She took the glass, drank, looked at Nathan, who was watching her with an expression she finally recognized. Not pity, not curiosity, but the exhausted hope of a man who had been alone for so long that the prospect of connection terrified him as much as it drew him. I don't think you're a charity case. Her voice was quiet, stripped of defense. I think you're a man who opened his home because his daughters asked him to. I think you are raising 2 incredible kids while carrying grief that would have broken most people. And I think this penthouse, for all its square footage, is just as empty as my studio. She paused, and what she said next surprised them both. Your coffee is terrible, by the way, but I'd like to stay and drink it anyway. Something released in Nathan's shoulders, a tension so old he had probably forgotten it was there. The coffee gets better if you add enough sugar. I take it black. Then you're stuck with terrible. Jake, who had been watching this entire exchange with the intensity of a man solving an equation, finally exhaled. He grabbed his mug, moved toward the living room, and muttered as he passed Nathan. She nearly left because of the money. Didn't come for it. Nathan's only response was a look that contained 7 years of caution and approximately 30 seconds of something new. The rest of the morning unspooled with the beautiful disorder of a holiday that had been expanded without warning. The pancakes survived. The ham went into the oven under Jake's supervision, which Nathan predicted would end in disaster, and Jake swore would end in triumph. The girls showed Vivian every present, every art project, every photograph on the wall of the hallway that served as the family's unofficial museum. Vivian paused at a wedding photo, Nathan impossibly young Claire, in a simple white dress with sunflowers looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. She was beautiful. She was also late to our own wedding by 45 minutes because she couldn't find parking. The church was 3 blocks from our apartment. The fondness in his voice was unmistakable, and so was the fact that he could speak about Claire now with tenderness rather than devastation, the particular tone of a man who had made peace with his loss, even if he had not yet made peace with living after it. They sat for the Thanksgiving-style Christmas meal. Jake had somehow assembled the ham, burnt on one side, caramelization, mashed potatoes, lumpy green beans, overcooked rolls from a package. Rosie insisted on gratitude declarations before eating. Rosie went first, vibrating with the urgency of a child who might explode if she had to wait. I'm grateful for our Lego set and for Vivian coming and for Daddy not burning the house down this year. That was one time. Chloe more measured. I'm grateful for my soccer ball and for Uncle Jake, even though he burns ham, and for Vivian having a terrible date last night, because otherwise we wouldn't have met her. Jake raised his glass of orange juice with mock formality. Grateful for these two monsters, for Nathan being too stubborn to quit, even when things are hard, and for Vivian being brave enough to join this circus. Nathan spoke slowly, each word deliberate as a blueprint notation. Grateful that my daughters have better instincts than their father, that they see the best in people instead of assuming the worst. Every face turned to Vivian. She looked at these people, known to her for less than 18 hours, who had pulled her into their orbit without asking permission, who had fought with her and forgiven her before the coffee had gone cold. I'm grateful that 2 little girls had the courage to talk to a stranger, that their father had the generosity to invite her in, that I was smart enough to say yes, and that sometimes the worst nights lead to the best mornings. Quiet settled over the table, the specific quiet of people absorbing something that mattered. Then Rosie breaking it with surgical precision. You're going to make Daddy cry again. I'm not crying. You cried during the toothpaste commercial last week. That was a very moving advertisement about family connection. Vivian had to leave at 12:30 to make her hospital shift. The goodbye at the elevator was brief, warm, complicated. Rosie's hug was a collision. Chloe's was a careful pressing of her face against Vivian's hip. Nathan stood a careful distance away, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man who wanted to step closer and was not yet sure he was allowed. Thank you for this morning. Thank the girls. They kidnapped you. We rescued her, Rosie corrected from inside the elevator. From being alone on Christmas. The doors closed. Vivian rode down in the mirrored elevator and caught her reflection, a woman who looked different than the one who had ridden up 4 hours ago. Not happier exactly. Changed. That night after her shift, 12 hours that included a child with a fractured wrist, an elderly man with chest pains that turned out to be indigestion, and a homeless woman who just wanted somewhere warm to sit, Vivian found a text from Nathan. Girls are asleep. House is quiet. Thank you for coming today. It was the best Christmas we've had in a long time. She typed back from the break room, still in scrubs, her feet aching. Thank you for the terrible coffee. Coming back for more. She stared at the message for a long time, then typed maybe. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that surprised Vivian with its naturalness. They texted daily small observations, photographs, the ordinary debris of lives being cautiously woven together. Nathan sent pictures of the girls' latest art projects and soccer mishaps. Vivian sent him an article about structural engineering innovations she had found in a hospital waiting room magazine, with the note, thought of you. Don't know why there was an engineering magazine in an ER. They talked on the phone some nights after the twins were asleep, and Vivian's shift ended conversations that wandered from architecture to medicine to the particular challenges of making spaghetti for children who considered any vegetable a personal offense. Their first real date happened at a diner in Wicker Park that Vivian chose because it served breakfast all day and she could afford to split the check. Nathan arrived in a car that his driver dropped him off in 2 blocks away, a concession Vivian noticed and understood. He was trying to close the distance, not by pretending it didn't exist, but by not rubbing it in her face. She appreciated the effort even as she resented the fact that it was necessary. The conversation went deeper than Christmas had allowed. Nathan told her about Claire in layers. Now the laughter that filled rooms, the stubborn insistence on doing things her way, the proposal during a thunderstorm because he was too impatient to wait for better weather. He told her about the wedding ring he still wore sometimes on a chain under his shirt because removing it felt like abandonment. He told her about the nights, the silence of the penthouse after bedtime, the way grief didn't diminish, so much as change shape becoming smaller but denser, a collapsed star inside his chest that never fully cooled. Vivian told him about her father walked out when she was 10, no forwarding address, no explanation that a child could understand. About her mother working two jobs to keep them housed and fed and believing in a future that required education and determination in equal measure. About medical school, the thrill of it, the identity it had given her, the woman she had been becoming before the phone call that ended everything. Stage 3, both lungs. They gave her 18 months. She got 22. She told it dry factual, the way she had told it 100 times, but Nathan heard what lived beneath the clinical language, the guilt of a woman who had chosen her mother over her own life and would make the same choice again, and hated herself a little for both things. You gave up your career to take care of her. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was duty. She raised me alone, I owed her. Nathan leaned forward, and what he said next cut through every defense she had built in 10 years of self-reliance. You didn't owe her anything. You did it because you loved her. There's a difference. Duty is what you do because you have to. What you did walking away from everything you'd built to hold your mother's hand for 2 years, that was love. Don't diminish it by calling it debt. Vivian's coffee had gone cold in her hands. She stared at the surface and fought the tightness in her throat, because no one had ever reframed the worst period of her life as something other than loss. Everyone had called it sacrifice, tragedy, bad luck. Nathan was the first person to call it love, without making it sound like a consolation prize. She told him about the engagement, the ER doctor, 2 years together, the apartment they had shared in Lincoln Park, her first taste of stability since her mother's illness. The discovery 6 months before the wedding that he had a wife and 2 children in Minneapolis. Not separated, not divorcing, married fully actively, while courting Vivian with a sincerity that she now understood had been performance of the highest caliber. I trusted him completely. I built my entire recovery around him after mom. After medical school, he was supposed to be the proof that good things could still happen. And it was all fabricated. Every dinner, every weekend, every time he said he loved me. Nathan's response carried the quiet force of someone who had spent years building things designed to stand. Being betrayed doesn't make you foolish. It makes him unworthy of the trust you gave. Don't carry his guilt. It was never yours. They saw each other twice more before the end of January, once for a walk through Lincoln Park that left them both frozen, and neither willing to suggest going inside once for another diner meal, where Vivian beat Nathan at thumb wrestling 3 times in a row, and he accused her of having unfairly strong hands from years of CPR compressions. Each meeting lowered the walls between them by fractions of an inch. Each conversation revealed new rooms in each other's architecture. But the walls between their worlds remained, and in February they began to crack. Nathan promised to pick Vivian up after her overnight shift, their new ritual coffee at 6 a.m., the quiet before the city woke. But a meeting ran long, a deal involving the acquisition of a Texas-based construction firm worth $500 million, and at 4 a.m., his text arrived with the precision of a blade. Sorry, can't make it. Vivian read it in the ER break room 16 hours into her shift, her feet throbbing, her back a map of small agonies. She stared at the screen and felt the familiar architecture of abandonment assembling itself, the father who left the fiancé, who lied the date, who texted his rejection from wherever cowards spend Christmas Eve. Pattern recognition. She had survived by recognizing patterns, and this one was unmistakable. She did not respond. 2 days of silence. Nathan called, she let it ring. He appeared at the studio on the third day, standing at her door in a coat that cost more than her furniture, holding coffee that had gone cold during the drive. You're angry. I'm not angry, I understand. $500 million is more important than breakfast. That's not what happened. Then what happened? I forgot. I got pulled into the deal and I forgot that someone was waiting for me. I've been putting work first for 7 years because work doesn't disappoint you. Work doesn't leave. Work doesn't die in a delivery room. And I forgot that I made a promise to a real person who was counting on me. The honesty of it disarmed her in a way that excuses never could. She stood in her doorway in scrub pants and a t-shirt, hair still damp from a post-shift shower, and looked at this man who ran a $3 billion empire and could not manage to show up for coffee. I don't need you to be rich, Nathan. I don't need the penthouse or the driver or any of it. I need you to show up when you say you'll show up. That's the only thing I'm asking, and it doesn't cost a cent. He stood on her doorstep, absorbing those words the way foundations absorb weight silently, completely, without visible complaint, but with an internal reorganization that changed everything. You're right. I'm sorry. Not CEO sorry, actually sorry. The money fight came 3 weeks later, as inevitable as structural settling in a new building. Nathan had noticed what Vivian would never say: the extra shifts, the unchanged boots, the way she counted exact change at coffee shops with the focused intensity of someone for whom every dollar had a destination. He learned from the girls that Vivian had taught them to make sandwiches for dinner one night when she was watching them because, as Rosie reported with no sense of its significance, V said the best meals are the ones you make yourself, and anyway the bread was almost expired, so we had to use it up. He offered to pay for her to return to medical school. The words came out careful, rehearsed, the way Nathan delivered proposals to his board, logical, well-structured, devoid of condescension. Full ride, part-time program, no strings. Vivian's reaction was physical. She straightened as though he had struck her, her chin, lifting, her eyes hardening into something he had not seen before. The warmth that had been building between them for 2 months vanished behind a wall of titanium. No, absolutely not. Vivian, I know you can. That's not the point. I am not a renovation project. I am not a building you can improve with enough funding. Do not stand in my apartment and offer to fix my life with your checkbook. Nathan's own anger surfaced for the first time, not the controlled corporate displeasure he deployed in boardrooms, but something rawer, more personal. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to help someone I care about who gave up her dream to take care of her mother and deserves a second chance. That's not charity. That's justice. Justice, Vivian repeated, her voice serrated. You want to know what justice looks like from where I'm standing? Justice is being able to pay my own rent without someone deciding I need rescuing. My father left when I was 10. My fiancé lied for 2 years. Every man who has ever had power over my life has used it to control me or abandon me. I will not add another name to that list. The fight lasted an hour. Words landed like construction debris, heavy, sharp, difficult to clear. Vivian left her own apartment to walk in the February cold rather than continue, and Nathan sat alone on her second-hand couch staring at a water stain on the ceiling and called Jake. Jake's voice carried the patience of a man who had been through his own wreckage. A marriage destroyed by his drinking, 5 years of sobriety, built one day at a time, a daughter he saw on weekends and missed the other 5 days like a phantom limb. She's not angry about money, Nathan. She's angry because she wants to say yes and won't let herself. Her self-respect is armor, keeps her alive. But armor is terrible for intimacy. So what do? Give her space, then come back smaller. Don't offer to pay for everything. Don't try to solve her. Ask how you can be part of her life in ways that don't involve your wallet. She doesn't need a benefactor. She needs a partner. 3 days later, Vivian texted, I'm sorry. I don't know how to let people help me without feeling like I'm losing something. It's not about you. It's about every door that's ever been opened for me turning out to have a price tag behind it. Nathan typed back, I hear you. No more checkbook. But I'm not going to pretend I don't see you working doubles to make rent. What if we find a different way, not money but time? I'll take the girls on your long shift days so you don't have to worry about them. And you teach them first aid because Rosie has already tried to bandage the cat and the cat did not appreciate it. The compromise held. It was imperfect, lopsided, shaped around the fault lines where their worlds didn't fit together. But it held. Through March and into April, the relationship deepened in the way that real things deepen, not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small ones. Nathan started leaving the office at 5 p.m. twice a week, an act so unprecedented that his executive assistant checked whether he was feeling ill. Vivian started sleeping at the penthouse on nights she wasn't working, occupying the guest room with her toothbrush and one change of clothes, and the persistent feeling of being a visitor in someone else's life. The girls started calling her V with the casual possessiveness of children who had decided she belonged to them and saw no reason to consult anyone about it. Chloe drew her emotion map, the things she had been doing since she was 5, mapping the people in her world according to where they stood in relation to each other. And Vivian was in it now, connected to everyone, drawn in purple crayon with a small heart beside her name that Chloe had added without comment. Nathan arrived at the hospital one April night to pick Vivian up after her shift. He brought coffee, their ritual restored 6 a.m., the city still half asleep. But when Vivian came through the ER doors, still in scrubs, her face was wrong, pale beneath the fluorescent, stripped exhaustion. Her hands, usually steady enough to start IVs on screaming toddlers, were trembling. Bad shift. She didn't answer immediately. They walked to the car in silence, Vivian gripping her coffee like an anchor. When she finally spoke, her voice had the quality of someone reporting from a great distance. Lost a kid tonight, 6 years old, hit by a car on the west side. His mother was with him the whole time. I held her hand while we called it. She kept asking me to try again. Try one more time. Nathan did not say he was sorry. He had learned by now that Vivian did not need sorry. He reached across the console and took her hand, the hand that had held a dying child's mother, the hand that had pushed on a small chest trying to restart a heart that had already decided to stop, and held it. He did not squeeze, did not rub his thumb across her knuckles in false comfort, just held. And Vivian let him, which was more than she had let anyone do in 4 years, which was its own form of trust, its own quiet declaration. This is why I couldn't finish medical school, she said after a long time, her voice barely audible. Not just because of Mom, because I was afraid that if I became a doctor, I'd have to make the calls. The final calls, stop compressions, call time of death, tell a mother her child is gone. As a nurse, I still see it, I still feel it, but I'm not the one who has to say the words. I let someone else carry that weight. And I don't know if that makes me wise or a coward. Nathan's response was unhurried, shaped with the care of a man who understood that some things once built could never be unbuilt. You held that mother's hand tonight. You stayed in the room when other people would have found a reason to leave. That's not cowardice. That's the hardest kind of courage there is, the kind that doesn't get to save the day but shows up anyway. She turned to look at him, and what passed between them in the gray pre-dawn light of a hospital parking lot was not romance. It was recognition. Two people who carried weight seeing each other clearly and choosing not to look away. That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, Nathan's phone rang at 2 in the morning. Jake's voice tight with the controlled panic of a man who had been trained by sobriety to keep his emotions leashed even when they were trying to kill him. Chloe's sick. Bad stomach pain getting worse. I'm driving to the ER now. Nathan was in Dallas, Texas. A 2-day trip to finalize the Southern acquisition, the deal that had been consuming his attention for months. 3 hours by plane, minimum. He was already pulling on pants, already calling on his pilot, already doing the math of distance and time and the unbearable geography of being in the wrong place when your child is in the right kind of pain. He called Vivian's cell. She was on shift. She picked up on the first ring. Nathan, I know. She's already here. She's coming in on the ambulance right now. I'm meeting her at the door. The collision of timing, Chloe arriving at the exact hospital where Vivian worked on the exact night Vivian was on shift, was the kind of coincidence that fiction would call implausible and life calls Tuesday. Vivian hung up the phone and walked to the ambulance bay, and when the doors opened and the paramedics rolled out a stretcher with a 7-year-old girl whose eyes were wide with pain and fear, Vivian shifted into the version of herself that had been built for exactly this. She assessed appendicitis, likely given the location and progression of pain. She paged the surgical team. She started the IV herself because Chloe was frightened, and Vivian's hands were the steadiest in the ER, and she would be damned if anyone else stuck a needle in this child. She held Chloe's hand and spoke in the voice she used for scared children, calm, warm, certain. You know where you are. This is my hospital. This is where I work every night, and I'm going to be around here until you wake up. Chloe's voice was small, drugged already with pain medication. V, you're really here. I'm really here, and I'm not going anywhere. Jake paced the surgical waiting room with the coiled energy of a man who had once channeled all of his anxiety into a bottle and now had to feel every ounce of it sober. Rosie sat beside him, unusually quiet, drawing on a napkin with a pen she had borrowed from the nurse's station. She was drawing a map. Later, Vivian would learn that Chloe had taught Rosie to draw emotion maps, and Rosie was making one now, a map of everyone who mattered, connected by lines with Chloe's name in the center, and a note beside it in second-grade handwriting, "Get better or else." Nathan landed at O'Hare at 4:17 a.m., was in the hospital by 4:52, still wearing the clothes he had been sleeping in at the Dallas hotel. He ran through the corridors of Cook County, past the front desk, past security, who recognized him from 3 months of 6 a.m. coffee pickups, and waved him through past the waiting room, where Jake stood and grabbed his shoulder and said, "She's out. She's okay. Routine. All clear." Nathan pushed through to the recovery room and stopped in the doorway. Vivian was sitting in a plastic chair beside Chloe's bed, one hand holding the girl's small fingers, the other resting on the bed rail. She was still in scrubs. Her shift had ended 2 hours ago. She had not left. The circles under her eyes were dark as bruises, but her posture was upright, alert, a sentinel who had taken a post and would not abandon it. Chloe was sleeping, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in the way that only unconscious children can achieve. The appendix was out, the surgery had been routine, the anesthesia had gone smoothly. Everything was fine. But Nathan stood into the doorway and saw something beyond the clinical details, a woman who had stayed, who had not waited to be asked or told or summoned, who had been here in the right place at the right time and had not hesitated, had not calculated, had simply done what she had always done. She had shown up. Chloe stirred, opened her eyes, saw Vivian first. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed. Daddy's gone." "Daddy just walked in." Chloe turned her head and found Nathan in the doorway. Her smile was drowsy, lopsided, medicated. "Daddy, V was here the whole time." She held my hand. Nathan crossed the room and knelt beside the bed. He kissed his daughter's forehead. Then he looked at Vivian over Chloe's head, and what his face contained was not gratitude or relief or any of the things you might expect from a father whose child had just come through surgery. It was surrender. The final exhausted, grateful surrender of a man who had been holding the walls up by himself for 7 years and had just discovered that someone else had put their shoulder against the stone. Later, after Chloe fell back asleep, after Rosie had been collected by Jake, after the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythms, Nathan and Vivian sat in the hallway on plastic chairs that were never designed for comfort and had the conversation they had been circling for months. "You were here." His voice was rough. "You didn't wait for me to call. You didn't ask for permission. You were here. She's my patient, and she's more than that. You're still in scrubs. Your shift ended hours ago. She needed someone. I was someone." Nathan leaned his head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. "I was in Dallas. I was in Dallas negotiating a deal that means nothing, literally nothing compared to my daughter on an operating table, and you were here, holding her hand, being the person I couldn't be." Vivian turned to him. "You were here within 3 hours. You got on a plane in the middle of the night and flew across the state. Don't punish yourself for geography." "I've been punishing myself for 7 years. It's the only skill I've really perfected." She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, the grip of a man who had been drowning so quietly that no one had noticed, not even himself. "I love you." He said it looking at the ceiling, as though the words were easier to release if he wasn't watching where they landed. "I have for a while. I was just trying to find a way to say it that didn't feel like a betrayal of Claire, and I finally realized that loving you isn't replacing her. It's proof that what she taught me, how to love, how to give a damn, how to show up, it survived. She'd want me to use it." Vivian squeezed his hand. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry because she had spent a decade not crying in hospitals, and she would not start now, even though this was different from every other night in every other corridor. "I love you too. I tried not to. I have a whole system designed to prevent exactly this. It involves walls and distance and never getting close enough to lose anything. And your daughters walked right through it like it wasn't there." They sat in the hallway holding hands across the gap between two plastic chairs while the hospital hummed its nighttime frequencies around them. Somewhere a monitor beeped. Somewhere a door opened and closed. Somewhere a child cried and was comforted. And in a recovery room 20 feet away, a 7-year-old girl slept peacefully, knowing that when she woke, someone would be there. Two people from different worlds holding on to each other in the space between fear and faith, Having decided without ceremony, without fanfare, with nothing but honesty and exhaustion and the particular courage of people who have already lost everything once and know exactly what it cost, that the risk was worth it, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The week after Chloe's surgery, Vivian took leave from the hospital for the first time in 3 years. She moved into the penthouse with a single duffel bag containing 4 changes of clothes. Her toothbrush, a dog-eared copy of Grey's Anatomy she had kept since medical school, and the persistent feeling that she was borrowing someone else's life and would eventually be asked to return it. Chloe milked the recovery with the theatrical commitment of a child who had discovered that abdominal surgery came with unlimited screen time and adults who brought her things without being asked. Rosie, initially delighted by her sister's drama, grew restless by day 2 and began staging increasingly elaborate bids for attention, a handstand competition with no competitors, a dramatic reading of her spelling homework, and finally a tearful confession that she felt invisible delivered in the kitchen while Vivian was warming soup. Vivian recognized the pattern from the ER, where siblings of injured children often acted out, not from selfishness, but from the terrifying suspicion that love was a finite resource being redirected away from them. She knelt on the cold kitchen floor, eye to eye with Rosie, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. She chose to be present for someone else's child with the same deliberateness she brought to her patients. Here's what we're going to do. You and I are going to learn something together. Something only you and I will know. What? First aid, real first aid like I do at the hospital. You'll be able to help people, not pretend, help actual help. Rosie's entire demeanor shifted from overlooked to essential in the space of a breath. That afternoon, Vivian taught her the recovery position, how to check for breathing, how to apply pressure to a wound using whatever was available. Rosie practiced on stuffed animals with a seriousness that bordered on religious devotion, and when Chloe hobbled to the living room to investigate, she found her sister performing CPR on a bear named Mr. Buttons with textbook form. Nathan watched from the hallway. He had come home from the office early, another unprecedented act that his executive assistant noted with the quiet concern of someone monitoring seismic activity. He stood in his own home and watched a woman he had known for 4 months teach his daughter to save lives on the living room floor, and what he felt was the specific, devastating recognition of a gap being filled that he had not known was empty until he saw it closed. Claire would have done this. Claire, who had planned to be a pediatrician, who had volunteered at the Children's Hospital during her residency, who had believed that every child should know how to help another child, Claire would have taught their daughters first aid with the same patient precision. And here was Vivian, who had never met Claire, doing it anyway, not because anyone had asked, but because she saw what was needed and responded. The cooking became a revelation. Vivian's repertoire was limited to what she called ER food, things that could be made fast eaten, standing and cleaned up with one hand while charting with the other. Soup, mostly. Grilled cheese, oatmeal. The twins consumed these simple meals with a ferocity that baffled Nathan, whose attempts to order from the city's best restaurants had never generated comparable enthusiasm. Rosie provided the answer with her typical diplomacy. Your cooks make fancy stuff, but it tastes like nobody cares. V's soup tastes like she actually wants us to eat it. Nathan filed this observation alongside the others, the growing catalog of evidence that what his daughters craved was not perfection, but presence, not expense, but effort, not the best that money could buy, but the specific, irreplaceable thing that money couldn't touch. On the 5th night of her stay, after both girls were asleep, Chloe in her bed with 3 pillows propping her incision site, Rosie in hers, with Mr. Buttons bandaged head to toe, Vivian found herself standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the refrigerator. It was covered in art. Drawings, paintings, photographs, report cards. A crayon rendering of what appeared to be a family standing in front of a house signed by Rosie in the enormous, confident handwriting of a child who had never questioned her own importance. In every drawing that included people, there were 3 figures, 1 tall, 2 small. In the most recent one, dated a week ago, there were 4. Nathan appeared beside her. He had been on a conference call in his office. The business did not stop because his personal life had detonated, and he carried the particular exhaustion of a man toggling between spreadsheets and soup, between quarterly projections and second-grade homework. Penny, for your thoughts. This drawing, there are 4 people. Nathan looked at it. Rosie's work, a man with brown hair, two girls in red, and a new figure slightly shorter than the man with dark hair, and what appeared to be a stethoscope around her neck. She added you last week. Didn't ask permission. Just started drawing you into things. Vivian traced the fourth figure with one finger. I was thinking about what you said in the hospital, about what Claire taught you how to love, how to show up. I think I'm starting to understand something I didn't before. What's that? That I can have this. She gestured at the kitchen, the art, the evidence of a life in progress. That I can be part of this and still be a nurse and still be the person who gets up at midnight and goes to the hospital. That they don't cancel each other out. I just have to stop treating everything good as temporary. Nathan studied her face in the kitchen light, and what he said next landed with the precision of a cornerstone being set. That's the hardest part of losing someone, not the grief you can carry. It's the conviction that everything good is borrowed time, that happiness is just the setup for the next loss. I've been living inside that conviction for 7 years, and I'm only just now starting to see the walls I built with that. I see them too. I built the same ones. Then maybe we stop building walls and start putting in windows. Vivian leaned into him and Nathan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they stood in the kitchen, surrounded by children's art and the lingering scent of soup, two architects of their own isolation finally recognizing that the structures they had built to protect themselves had become the very things keeping them alone. The job offer arrived in May, delivered not by email or phone, but by a visit to the construction site that Nathan had been overseeing on Humboldt Park's west side. The Children's Hospital project, his passion, his purpose. The thing he pointed to when board members questioned why a CEO worth $3 billion still personally supervised builds. An architect named David Brennan, no relation to Jake, despite the coincidence that amused everyone, approached Nathan during a site walk and said the words that would rearrange the next year of his life. We need a structural lead, full-time. I remembered your early work, the community center in Englewood, the one you designed before you went corporate. Your engineering instincts were the best I'd ever seen. I want those instincts on this project. Nathan stood in the skeleton of an unfinished building and felt something he had not felt since before Claire died. The particular hunger of a man being offered the chance to build something that mattered with his own hands, instead of signing off on other people's blueprints from a corner office 30 floors above the street. The Children's Hospital had been his vision. He had pitched it to the city council, had secured the funding, had chosen the site. But the actual engineering, the calculations that would determine whether this building stood for 50 years or 100, the decisions about load distribution and seismic tolerance, and the invisible skeleton that held everything together, those decisions had been delegated to other people because Nathan Hale had become too important to do the work he loved. That night, sitting on the back steps of the Lincoln Square house they had begun looking at together, a place between their worlds, neither penthouse nor studio, a house with a yard and a leaking faucet, and the particular charm of something that needed work. Nathan told Vivian about the offer. It's full-time, real hours, real commitment. The girls would need after-school care. My schedule would change completely. And the pay as well, it's good, but it's engineer pay, not CEO pay. Do you want it? The answer came without hesitation, which was itself the answer. More than I've wanted anything professionally in 7 years. It's the work I was meant to do, not managing, not acquiring, building. Vivian did not offer money, did not offer to restructure her schedule or sacrifice her own career to accommodate his. Instead, she offered the thing that Nathan had been unable to give himself permission. Then take it. The girls will adjust. Kids are built for change. It's adults who calcify. And you have been slowly disappearing behind that desk for years. I've watched it. The man who coached soccer despite having no athletic ability, the man who closed his eyes when he ate chicken parmesan because the flavor connected him to someone he loved, that man is an engineer, not a CEO. The CEO is the job. The engineer is who you are. Nathan made 2 phone calls the next morning. The first was to David Brennan accepting the position. The second was to his board of directors, informing them that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations and promoting Jake Brennan to acting CEO while retaining his role as chairman. Jake's response when Nathan called him afterward consisted of 3 seconds of silence, followed by a single word that contained 20 years of friendship, 5 years of sobriety, and the particular eloquence of a man who expressed his deepest emotions through profanity. The restructuring sent tremors through the company. Analysts questioned the move. Business journalists wrote speculative pieces. Nathan's mother called. Margaret Hale had the specific kind of disappointment that manifested as concern. She had learned about Vivian from friends, the social network of Gold Coast mothers and grandmothers, who tracked the romantic movements of prominent men the way meteorologists tracked storm systems. Nathan, I hear you're seeing a nurse. Her name is Vivian. Claire was a teacher. At least that was comparable. This woman works nights in an emergency room. She dropped out of medical school. What kind of future is that? The kind where she saves lives every shift while I push paper. What kind of future is that? Margaret came to the penthouse. The meeting was civil in the way that treaty negotiations are civil, polite surfaces over irreconcilable positions. She asked about Vivian's family. None. Education, incomplete. Plans, undefined. Each answer confirmed what Margaret had already decided, and Vivian could see the verdict forming behind the older woman's careful smile. My son is a very wealthy man, Vivian. I don't mean to be blunt, but you understand the position you're in. Vivian's spine straightened. Her voice adopted the frequency she used in the EOSHR when a situation demanded absolute clarity, flat precise, carrying the authority of someone who had been in rooms where hesitation cost lives. Mrs. Hale, I know exactly where I stand. On my own 2 feet, paying my own bills. Here because your son invited me, not because of his bank account. If you want to know what kind of person I am, ask your granddaughters. They have better judgment than most adults I've encountered. Margaret left. The front door had barely closed before Nathan appeared from the hallway where he had been listening, not hiding but giving Vivian the space to fight her own battle while remaining close enough to intervene if the battle turned unfair. I'm sorry about her. Don't be. She's protecting her son. I understand mothers. She doesn't speak for me. I know, but she's not entirely wrong to worry. I don't fit in your world, Nathan. I never will. The question is whether you need me to. His answer was immediate, certain, the voice of a man who had made his decision and would not unmake it. I need you to fit in my life. The world can adjust. Summer brought the Children's Hospital project to full construction, and Nathan threw himself into the work with an energy Vivian had never seen from him. He came home to their new Lincoln Square house, purchased together, a deliberate choice, neither Gold Coast nor Pilsen, but somewhere between, with concrete dust on his boots and engineering calculations on his phone and a light in his eyes that had been absent since she had known him. He talked about load-bearing specifications over dinner with a passion that made the twins' eyes glaze and Vivian's heart expand. This was the man beneath the CEO. This was who he had been before grief had driven him into an office and locked the door. The crisis arrived in October, wearing the mundane disguise of a routine inspection. Nathan was reviewing the foundation work on the hospital's east wing when he found it rebar that didn't match the specifications. Thinner gauge, cheaper alloy, the kind of substitution that saved a contractor money and put everyone inside the finished building at risk. He pulled samples, ran calculations, and confirmed what his instincts had already told him. The subcontractor had cut corners on the structural reinforcement of a building designed to house sick children. The subcontractor was Harrison Wells Construction, a firm that had done business with Hale Construction Group for a decade, a firm that had contributed to Nathan's political connections, that had partnered on 3 previous projects, that was run by a man named Dan Harrison, who golfed with half of Nathan's board members. Reporting the violation would kill the partnership, delay the project by months, and generate exactly the kind of publicity that made investors nervous. Nathan reported it. He filed the complaint with the city building inspector, contacted the general contractor, and initiated the process that would result in Harrison Wells being removed from the project. He did this on a Tuesday afternoon without consulting Vivian, without consulting Jake, without consulting anyone, because structural integrity was not a matter of opinion or strategy or relationship management. It was physics. It was right and wrong. And a building full of children did not get to be the place where a man weighed ethics against convenience. Vivian learned about it on Wednesday morning, not from Nathan, but from a news alert on her phone. Hale Construction founder reports, subcontractor on own hospital project. She read the article twice, then called Nathan with the controlled calm of someone managing a trauma, steady hands racing mind. You reported Harrison Wells. Yes. They're one of your biggest partners. Dan Harrison has been at your house, former partner, and he won't be at the house again. Why didn't you tell me first? The silence on his end lasted 5 seconds in eternity in phone call time. Because it wasn't a conversation. It was a fact. The rebar was substandard. Children were going to be in that building. There was nothing to discuss. I'm not asking you to have stayed quiet. I'm asking you to have trusted me enough to say it out loud before the news did. Another silence longer. Then with the exhaustion of a man recognizing his oldest habit, you're right, I did what I always do, decided alone, acted alone, informed everyone after the fact. 7 years of solo parenting trained me to make every call by myself. But I'm not by myself anymore, and I keep forgetting that. You protected those children. That matters more than my feelings about timing. But next time, be right with me, not right alone. Deal. The fallout was significant. Harrison Wells threatened legal action. 3 board members called emergency meetings. The project timeline extended by 4 months. But Nathan's engineering team found a reinforcement solution that avoided demolishing the existing foundation, a design innovation that saved time and money, and would later be cited in trade publications as an example of adaptive structural problem solving. The building inspector reviewing Nathan's calculations made a comment that Nathan repeated to Vivian that night with the quiet pride of a man who had been validated in the way that mattered most. He said the building stands because someone cared more about getting it right than getting it done. That's engineering. That's also life, I think. The board settled. Harrison Wells settled. The project resumed with new subcontractors and a reputation for integrity that attracted better partners than the ones it had lost. And Vivian, watching Nathan navigate the crisis with the same steady competence he brought to everything, not panicking, not posturing, simply doing what needed to be done, understood something she had been circling for months. This man was not his money. He was not his company or his penthouse or his net worth. He was the person who checked rebar gauges because children's lives depended on it. He was the person who had taught his daughters that integrity was non-negotiable. He was at his core exactly what he had always been, an engineer who built things that stood. New Year's Eve arrived with the particular energy of a holiday that demands reflection. Jake had the girls for the night along with his daughter Megan, now a fixture of their expanded orbit, and the Lincoln Square house was quiet in a way it rarely was. Vivian stood in the kitchen she had helped choose in the house they had bought together. Looking out at the backyard where snow covered the garden beds, she planned to plant in spring and felt the specific disorienting peace of a woman who had stopped running. Nathan appeared with pizza from the place 2 blocks over that made the crust too thick and the sauce too sweet, and had become their default because Rosie had declared it the best pizza on the planet after exactly 1 slice. They ate standing at the counter, an old habit from the penthouse that had followed them to the new house, and talked about small things until the small things ran out and only the large ones remained. I've been thinking about something. Should I be worried? I want to go back to school, medical school. There's a part-time program designed for nurses who want to bridge to an MD, 2 years of evenings and weekends on top of clinical rotations. Nathan set his pizza down. His face moved through several expressions: surprise, concern, pride, fear, before settling on something she had learned to recognize as his version of joy. Understated, controlled, real. I think that's extraordinary. It's terrifying. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I already applied, got in on my old transcripts, they were good enough apparently, and I applied for a scholarship. She paused. The Claire Hale Foundation Scholarship. Nathan stared at her. The foundation he had established 6 months ago, scholarships for nurses and healthcare workers pursuing advanced degrees funded with his personal wealth, named for the woman who had wanted to heal children and never got the chance, had received 400 applications. He had not seen the list, had deliberately removed himself from the selection process to avoid exactly this kind of conflict. You applied through the official process, through the committee. No special treatment. If I get it on merit. If I don't, I find another way. She met his eyes. I won't take your money directly, Nathan. We've been through that. But a scholarship named for your wife earned through a blind process, that's not charity. That's honor. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her close, and she led him, and they stood in the warm house they had built together while the old year counted down its final hours. She would have loved you, Claire. She would have loved everything about this. I hope so, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure her daughters know exactly how extraordinary their mother was. Near midnight, they sat on the couch with the television counting down in Times Square. The distance between them had been closing all evening, and when the ball dropped and the new year began, Nathan kissed her gently at first, then with the conviction of a man who had decided to stop being afraid. She kissed him back with everything she had been holding in reserve, and when they finally separated, both breathing hard, the year that stretched ahead of them felt less like a question and more like an answer they were writing together. The engagement happened in June, 18 months after Christmas Eve. Fontana's, the same booth, Sal serving with the gentle authority of a man who had watched this story unfold from its first chapter and felt personally invested in its conclusion. It was the last day of school, and the twins had been vibrating at a frequency that suggested they possessed information they were barely containing. The breadsticks arrived, the meals were ordered, and then Chloe, the quiet one, the observer, the child who spoke rarely but never without purpose, looked at her father and detonated the careful plan Nathan had been assembling for weeks. "Daddy, when are you going to ask V to marry you?" Nathan's water went sideways. Vivian's fork froze. Rosie turned on her sister with the outrage of a co-conspirator whose operational security had just been catastrophically breached. "Chloe, we said wait for dessert. Dessert takes too long." Nathan wiped water from his chin and looked at Vivian across the table, and in his expression she saw the resignation of a man whose children had once again preempted his carefully constructed plans with something better. He shook his head, and the corners of his mouth turned upward, and then he was laughing genuinely helplessly, in a way that Vivian had only heard a few times, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he was supposed to be in control. "You know what, fine. We're doing this now." He slid out of the booth. Vivian felt the restaurant shift around them, conversations trailing off, heads turning, the particular hush that falls over a room when something significant is about to happen. Nathan knelt on the floor of Fontana's, in the same spot where his daughters had first dragged a stranger to their table on Christmas Eve, and looked up at the woman who had changed every calculation he had ever made about what his life could contain. "Vivian Cole, I had a plan. There were going to be flowers and a sunset and something that didn't involve my daughters announcing it over breadsticks. But nothing about us has ever been conventional, and I'm done pretending it should be." Rosie stage whispered across the table, "The ring, Daddy." He reached into his jacket pocket, not the sock drawer progress, and opened a small box containing a platinum band with a single diamond, modest by any standard, chosen with deliberation. "1 year ago, you were sitting alone at that table by the window, and my daughters walked up to you because they saw someone who needed kindness, and they didn't know enough about the world to be afraid of offering it. You stayed. You stayed when you found out about the money and wanted to run. You stayed when my mother made you feel unwelcome. You stayed when I forgot to show up, and you had every right to walk away. You stayed in a hospital room all night, holding my daughter's hand. You have taught me that real wealth is not what you build, but who you build it with, and I am asking you in this restaurant, where everything started, to let me build the rest of this with you." Vivian looked at him, kneeling on a restaurant floor in a jacket that still had concrete dust in the seams ripped from the hospital site. His daughters watching with barely contained nuclear excitement. Sal hovering with champagne he had apparently been keeping on ice for exactly this occasion, and felt every wall she had ever constructed shift on its foundation. Not crumbling, shifting, rearranging themselves into something new, something with windows and doors, something designed not to keep people out, but to let them in. "The ring's actually in your pocket this time. I have been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and my children have apparently decided the right moment it is now. They're usually right about these things. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Now get off the floor. Your knees aren't what they used to be." The restaurant erupted. Sal wept openly while pouring champagne. Jake, stationed at a nearby table with Megan, co-conspirator in the children's scheme, though he would deny it under oath, raised his glass and said nothing, which for Jake constituted the most eloquent statement of approval he had ever made. The twins nearly knocked Vivian out of the booth with the force of their celebration. The ring fit perfectly, and Vivian studied it on her finger with the careful attention of a woman examining something she had never expected to possess. Nathan watched her. I could have bought anything. I know. I chose this because it's honest. It's not trying to be more than it is, like you. Are you comparing me to a ring? I'm comparing you to the best decision I've ever made. They sold the penthouse. They did not sell the Lincoln Square house. They improved it. Nathan fixed the leaking faucet himself, which took 3 attempts, and generated language that Vivian suggested should not be repeated near the children. The girls' rooms were painted purple at their insistence, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceilings that Nathan and Vivian applied together on a Saturday afternoon lying on their backs on twin beds, arguing about whether Orion's belt was 3 stars or 4, and deciding it didn't matter, because the point was that they were lying on their daughters' beds putting stars on the ceiling, and this was the kind of afternoon that couldn't be purchased. Vivian received the Claire Hale Foundation Scholarship in August. The committee's decision was unanimous, and when Nathan told her, having learned the result from Jake, who had learned it from the committee chair, who had sworn both of them to secrecy, she sat at the kitchen table and cried in a way she had not cried since her mother died. Not from sadness, from the specific, overwhelming sensation of being given something you had been told you didn't deserve by people who had never met you in the name of a woman you had never known. I didn't take your money, she managed, but I'm taking her name, and I will be worthy of it. The hospital opened in October, 18 months after groundbreaking, 4 months behind the original schedule, and exactly on time for the revised one. Nathan stood at the ribbon cutting with Vivian beside him and the twins in front of him, each holding one handle of the oversized scissors. The crowd included city officials, construction crews, medical staff, journalists, and at the back, unannounced, Margaret Hale, who had driven from her house in Winnetka and stood with her hands clasped and her face carrying an expression her son had never seen on her before. Pride unqualified, without conditions or caveats. Nathan's speech was brief. This building is for Claire, who wanted to heal children and didn't get the chance, and for Vivian, who heals children every night, and reminded me that buildings mean nothing without the people inside them who know how to care. The wedding was held in December at Fontana's because some circles deserved to be completed. Sal served as unofficial master of ceremonies, his composure lasting approximately 4 minutes into the vows before dissolving entirely. Jake stood as best man in a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who were built for football and had been shoehorned into formal wear imperfectly magnificently. He cried 3 times and blamed seasonal allergies each time to no one's belief. Rosie and Chloe served as flower girls in red velvet dresses because tradition was tradition and took their duties with a solemnity that caused several guests to comment that these children would either become surgeons or generals. Nathan's vows were short. He had learned from a year of loving Vivian that the most important things required the fewest words. You taught me that strength isn't building the tallest structure. Strength is sitting beside a hospital bed at 3 in the morning holding someone's hand. I promise to choose you every day, especially the hard days. Vivian had written her vows on note cards, had rehearsed them for a week, and set them aside when the moment arrived. 1 year ago, I sat alone at that table with a can of soup waiting for me at home, and nothing on my calendar but another shift. You gave me a family. I promised to stop running. I promised to stay even when every instinct I have tells me to protect myself by leaving. Because you are worth staying for. Your daughters are worth staying for. All of this is worth every wall I've had to tear down. After the ceremony, during the reception, while guests danced and Jake attempted karaoke and the twins conducted quality control assessments of every dessert on the table, Vivian stepped outside for air. The December cold hit her face and the snow was falling again. The same soft, persistent snow that had been falling exactly two years ago when she had sat alone in this restaurant and watched her phone deliver the message that she was not worth showing up for. A figure stood near the entrance. Margaret Hale in a dark coat holding a small wrapped package. Vivian tensed, then relaxed. The older woman's posture held none of the rigidity of their first encounter. Something had shifted, perhaps the hospital, perhaps the scholarship, perhaps simply the accumulated evidence of a year in which Vivian had shown up every time she was needed, and several times she wasn't. Margaret held out the package. Vivian opened it and found a photograph in a simple silver frame, Claire laughing, holding 2 newborns in the hospital, the image taken in the brief window between delivery and catastrophe. The only photograph of Claire with her daughters, the most precious object the Hale family possessed. I want you to have this. She should be part of today. Vivian's hands trembled around the frame. Mrs. Hale, Margaret, and I was wrong about you. I watched you this year, how you treat those girls, how you've changed my son, how you stood in my living room and told me exactly who you were without flinching. Claire would have chosen you herself. I believe that. They stood in the snow, two women connected by a man and separated by everything else. And then Margaret did something that neither of them had expected. She pulled Vivian into a hug, brief and fierce, the embrace of a woman who did not embrace easily and meant it completely when she did. Vivian returned to the reception carrying the photograph. She found Nathan at their table and showed him. His face did what faces do when emotion arrives faster than composure can contain it. He pressed his lips together, breathed through his nose, and failed entirely to prevent his eyes from filling. Vivian tucked the photograph into her bouquet, positioning it so that Claire's face was visible between the flowers. She should be here, at least this way. Nathan looked at his new wife, at the photograph of his first wife, nested in the wedding flowers, and understood that this was what love looked like when it was mature enough to hold complexity, not the replacement of one person with another, but the expansion of a heart to include everyone who mattered, living and dead, present and remembered. The seasons that followed the wedding settled into the rhythm of a life being built rather than performed. Vivian started medical school in January part-time, running on coffee and determination and the specific stubbornness that had kept her alive through every previous chapter. She studied at the kitchen table while the girls did homework beside her. She practiced sutures on bananas while Nathan reviewed blueprints across the room. She fell asleep in textbooks and woke with equations imprinted on her cheek, and Nathan would photograph the imprint and send it to Jake with the caption, "Future Doctor," and Jake would respond with an emoji that somehow conveyed both admiration and mockery. The girls adjusted to having Vivian as a permanent fixture in their lives, though they still tested boundaries and pushed back. And once, during an argument about homework, Rosie deployed the words that every step-parent dreads, "You're not our real mom." Vivian had not flinched, had responded with the steadiness of a woman who had been preparing for this moment since the first time she had braided their hair wrong, and they had corrected her with the gentle condescension of children teaching an adult something basic. "I know I'm not your real mom. I'm your V, and V says you still have to finish your math." On Christmas Eve, the 2nd December after the wedding, 3 Christmases since the one that started everything, the family returned to Fontana's. It was tradition now encoded in the Hale family calendar with the permanence of gravity. Sal seated them at the corner booth with the ceremony of a man performing a sacred rite. Jake brought Megan, now 12, who sat at the end of the table with the exaggerated patience of a pre-teenager enduring family time. The breadsticks arrived. The meals were ordered. Nathan ordered chicken parmesan, as he always would, and Vivian held his hand beneath the table when he closed his eyes at the first bite, because she understood that this ritual belonged to Claire, and always would, and she would never ask him to give it up. The restaurant was full, families, couples, groups of friends, the annual congregation of people choosing to spend the last evening of the year in this particular room with these particular people. Candles flickered. Conversations hummed. Snow fell past the windows in the same soft, persistent way it had fallen 3 years ago, as though the weather itself were honoring the occasion. The twins were 10 now, taller, louder, more certain of their opinions. Rosie had joined the school science club and conducted experiments that occasionally produced small explosions. Chloe made the select soccer team and had finally mastered the art of scoring on the correct goal. They sat across from their father and their stepmother with the comfortable restlessness of children who knew they were loved and felt no need to perform gratitude for it. Vivian saw her first. A woman sat alone at the window table, the same table where Vivian had sat 3 Christmases ago. Dark hair, no makeup, clothes that were clean and careful. She was holding her phone in both hands, staring at the screen with the expression of someone who had just received news that rearranged everything, and her shoulders were held with the rigid control of a person who was about to break and was determined not to do it here. Vivian looked at Nathan. Nathan had already seen her. Their eyes met across the table, and in the space between them passed an entire conversation. Recognition, memory, understanding the particular shared vocabulary of two people who had been exactly where that woman was and remembered precisely how it felt. They smiled. Rosie followed their gaze. Her eyes found the woman by the window, and something crossed her face that was not calculation or impulse, but inheritance, the same instinct that had propelled her across a restaurant 3 years ago, the same conviction that loneliness was a problem she was qualified to address. She began to slide out of the booth. Nathan's voice carried the tone of a father who already knew how this would end. Rosie, just checking Dad. She was already moving. The same confidence, the same refusal to be stopped by social convention or adult caution or the thousand invisible boundaries that separate people from each other in restaurants and subway cars and hospital waiting rooms. Nathan looked at Vivian. Vivian nodded. And in the corner booth of an Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, on a snowy Christmas Eve that looked exactly like the one where everything began, a family watched their daughter walk toward a stranger. Because sometimes two 7-year-olds know something that takes adults years to learn, that no one deserves to eat alone on Christmas Eve. That kindness is not an imposition, but a gift that the bravest thing you can do in a world that teaches you to look away from other people's pain is to walk toward it and ask if they are okay. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a child reached a table by a window and spoke to a woman she had never met. And the woman looked down at the small, serious face and felt something crack in the armor she had spent years building. And the circle began again. Because that is what love does. Not the fairy tale version, not the grand gesture, sweep you off your feet version that movies sell and reality rarely delivers. The real version. The kind that is built slowly out of burned cookies and terrible coffee and arguments about money and hospital hallways at 3 in the morning, and a man who orders the same meal every Christmas Eve because he cannot let go, and a woman who almost didn't stay because she was afraid of what staying would cost. Love is choosing to show up day after day when it's hard, when it's boring, when the glamour is gone and what's left is dishes in the sink and homework at the table and a radiator that clicks at night and a house that smells like soup. Nathan Hale built skyscrapers. Vivian Cole saved lives. But the most important thing either of them ever built was this: a family made of found pieces assembled without instructions, held together not by money or status or any of the things the world uses to measure worth, but by the decision made fresh every morning to stay. That was wealth. That was success. That was home. And it had started all of it, every last brick of it, because two little girls saw a stranger crying in a restaurant and decided to do something about it.